Shalom, I'm Hila.
And I'm Ariela. We are research associates on the disabilities team of the Family Research Group at the Myers-JDC-Brookdale Institute. We invite you to join us on a tour of Israel's Capitol Hill in Jerusalem. We will explore how perceptions, legislation, and policies regarding people with disabilities in Israel have been changed in the last decades. We will also zoom in on how the applied research of the Myers-JDC-Brookdale Institute has helped to improve national disability policy and practice.
Our first stop is the Supreme Court. The most recent data, analyzed by the MJB Institute, show that over 1.5 million people in Israel are identified as people with disabilities. That's about 17% of Israelis. Their share in the general population increases with age. 9% of children, 17% of working-age adults, and 50% of old people. The percentage of people with disabilities is higher among Arabs than Jews. Until the late 1990s, the disability legislation in Israel focused primarily on issues of welfare benefits based on a discourse of need and charity rather than of human rights and equality. This legislation perpetuated the disadvantaged status of the disability community and their exclusion from all spheres of public life. Over the past 25 years, we have witnessed significant changes in legislation and policy, as well as greater inclusion of people with disabilities in society. To a large extent, these changes are due to legal advocacy and community activism. In 1993, the Bizchut organization, the Human Rights Center for People with Disabilities, filed a petition to the Supreme Court on behalf of Shachar Botzer, a 13-year-old boy who uses a wheelchair. The petition demanded that Shachar's local municipality make public buildings accessible, especially his school. The Supreme Court accepted the petition and in a presidential ruling determined that the rights of people with disabilities are basic human rights anchored in the principle of equality. For the first time, accessibility was acknowledged as an essential right and a means to guarantee equality and inclusion in society. Following the Supreme Court ruling, Bizchut promoted legislation to ensure equality and inclusion and to prevent discrimination. After a long struggle, the Equal Rights for Persons with Disabilities law was passed in 1998. The law frames issues of people with disabilities as issues of basic human rights.
MJB prepared a report on the inclusion of people with disabilities for the Ministry of Justice, the ministry in charge of the implementation and enforcement of the Equal Rights Law. According to the leading principle in the disability community of nothing about us without us, we make every effort to involve people with disabilities in our studies. Accordingly, we reach out to members in the disability community to hear firsthand what they think. We conducted focus groups, interviews, and consultations with an advisory committee of people with disabilities. Their input helped us identify the main issues faced by people with disabilities, which we later included in the study questionnaire.
A few years after the Equal Rights Law was enacted, large demonstrations took place, protesting policy which limited the integration of people with disabilities into the labor market and left many in the disability community unemployed and poor. In response, the government established a national commission to examine and address the problem. The goal was to increase the income of disability benefit recipients through both benefits and employment. The Commission's recommendations led to the amendment of the National Insurance Law in 2009.
MJB was commissioned by the National Insurance Institute to conduct 2 studies. The first study was conducted at the time of the amendment, provided a thorough mapping of working-age people with disabilities for the first time in Israel. We found that the employment rate among general disability benefit recipients was 25%. The second study was commissioned to evaluate why the amendment failed to significantly increase employment rates among people with disabilities. One interesting finding was that people with learning disabilities had difficulty integrating into the labor market. Their disabilities are considered mild, so they were entitled to very few benefits. We found that with a few additional benefits and support, their integration into employment can be successful. Let's continue to the second stop on our tour. We will pass through the Vivian and Maurice War Rose Garden and stop at the Knesset.
The change in perceptions about people with disabilities led to new legislation in Israel and new disability policies. Another milestone is the 2006 UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which Israel ratified in 2012. The convention inspired Israel's groundbreaking amendment in 2016 to the Legal Capacity and Guardianship Law, allowing supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship and positioning Israel as a world pioneer in disability rights. The Institute was commissioned to conduct a study for the Ministry of Justice to review the new procedures for supported decision-making, define best practice, and help the ministry develop a monitoring mechanism.
In a 2017 policy reform, the Ministry of Labor, Social Affairs, and Social Services set up a Disabilities Administration, adopting an emerging approach known as Person-Centered Service Provision. This means instead of providing services based on a person's disability, people are provided personalized services according to their needs, capacities, and preferences. At MJB, we examine the implementation of the person-centered service approach at both the macro and the micro levels. At the macro level, we conducted a formative evaluation of the perceived systemic changes implemented by the administration. At the micro level, we conducted a formative evaluation of a personal budget pilot program. Each of the program participants designs a personal plan with the support of a case manager and receives a budget to implement their plan. Although it is a small-scale pilot program, it has far-reaching implications for the national scale-up of person-centered service provision.
Now on to the last stop of our tour, the JDC building, home to the Myers-JDC-Brookdale Institute, situated here on Capitol Hill, a stone's throw from the Supreme Court and the Knesset, as well as major government ministries. At MJB, applied social research on disabilities means using rigorous research and extensive knowledge to help improve decisions that impact well-being of people with disabilities in Israel. We use our research to help inform legislation and policy, advise programming, and improve services for individuals, families, and the disability community. To this end, the disabilities team at the Institute conducts 4 main types of applied research. The first involves thorough mapping. Some of our studies are designed to map services and policies. Other studies map needs emerging from the field. For example, how does the government decide how to best allocate resources for children with disabilities? The only national survey about the needs of these children and their families was conducted over 25 years ago by MJB. In order to equip decision makers with up-to-date data, we initiated a large-scale survey of needs and service usage among parents of children with disabilities.
Secondly, we conduct evaluations of innovative programs, specifically programs that can help shape national policy. An apt example is our evaluation of the personal budgeting pilot program that we mentioned earlier. The goal in this case is to conduct a formative evaluation to shape the program and to help in its national scale-up.
Thirdly, We conduct evaluations of national policies and programs. These studies are designed to identify what works, what doesn't, and why, to ascertain service usage, and more. For instance, a national reform moved responsibility for the provision of mental health services from the Ministry of Health to Israel's healthcare fund. We conducted a study ascertaining the current state of mental health service usage by clients at the onset of the reform. 6 years later, we are now conducting a follow-up study to see the impact of the reform thus far.
Finally, we conduct international literature and policy reviews. At the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ministry of Education commissioned a rapid response international review of special education policies during COVID. A report presented responses to the crisis of education systems in several selected countries. From school lockdown and distance learning to providing education and care needs for children at their homes and more. In this way, applied research can inform policymakers about what is being done in other countries and facilitate an adaptation of relevant solutions.
Our tour began at the Supreme Court, continued to the Knesset by way of government ministries, and ended at the Myers-JDC-Brookdale Institute. We followed changes in perceptions, legislation, policy, programs, and services for people with disabilities in Israel over time. We demonstrated how our applied social research has informed and equipped decision-makers along the way, and how it helps improve the well-being of people with disabilities in Israel.
Thank you for joining our tour today, and thank you for your ongoing support of the work that we do.